As Jasmine approached the counter, the gate agent looked up with a practiced smile. But the moment her eyes landed on Jasmine's skin color, the smile faltered. "Excuse me, ma'am," the agent said sharply. "This line is for first-class passengers only. Economy is over there." Jasmine's expression stayed composed. She held up her ticket. "I am flying first class." The agent frowned, eyeing her skeptically. "Are you sure this ticket is yours?" A murmur rippled through the line. A businessman behind her scoffed. "Some people will do anything to sneak into first class." Jasmine inhaled slowly, resisting the urge to snap back. She had dealt with prejudice before. Calmly, she repeated, "This is my ticket." The agent hesitated, then scanned it. The machine beeped green. First class confirmed. Still, instead of apologizing, the agent muttered, "Well, don't cause any problems up there." Jasmine said nothing, but inside, a quiet fire burned. As she walked down the jet bridge, whispers followed. Some passengers stared at her as though she didn't belong. Jasmine kept her chin high, heels clicking against the floor, reminding herself that dignity couldn't be stripped away by prejudice. But the real test hadn't even begun. Stepping into the cabin, Jasmine was greeted by a flight attendant, a tall woman with a polished smile. But the moment she saw Jasmine's ticket and seat assignment, that smile stiffened. "First class is full," she said curtly. "You must be mistaken." "Economy is that way." Jasmine calmly held up her boarding pass again. "Seat 2A. The attendant's eyes narrowed. "Let me see that." She snatched the ticket, examined it, and reluctantly handed it back. "Fine, but don't expect special treatment." Jasmine simply nodded and walked toward her seat. But whispers started again. "Unbelievable," muttered a woman clutching a designer purse. "First class is supposed to be exclusive." "She probably got a free upgrade," sneered another passenger. Jasmine placed her bag overhead, ignoring them. She sat down in 2A with quiet grace, but the tension in the cabin was thick. As boarding finished, Jasmine noticed something. The attendants smiled warmly at other first-class passengers, offering drinks, hanging coats, even kneeling to speak politely. But for Jasmine, nothing, not even water. A businessman across the aisle leaned toward her. "Don't take it personally," he whispered with a smirk. "It's just, well, you don't really fit the usual profile up here." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "And what profile would that be?" He shrugged, smug. "You know," Jasmine looked away. She had faced prejudice before, but the open hostility in this cabin was something else. She reminded herself, stay calm, stay patient. When meal service began, the discrimination escalated. "Would you like champagne, sir?" The attendant beamed at the man beside her. "And for you, ma'am? Wine or champagne?" she asked the woman across the aisle. Then she turned to Jasmine. "We only have water left." Jasmine glanced at the untouched bottles of champagne in the cart. "I'll take champagne, thank you." The attendant stiffened. "I said we're out." Before Jasmine could respond, another passenger chimed in loudly. "Don't waste the good stuff." "She doesn't belong here anyway." Laughter rippled through a few seats. Jasmine's jaw tightened. She said nothing, but her silence carried weight. When meals were served, the difference was glaring. Everyone else received a beautifully plated dish. Jasmine was handed a plain, cold tray as if she were in economy. "Excuse me," Jasmine said evenly. "This isn't the first-class meal," the attendant smirked. "That's all we have left." Jasmine's eyes flicked to the tray of untouched gourmet meals. She took a slow breath, choosing dignity over confrontation. But inside, the fire grew hotter. The murmurs grew louder as the flight went on. Passengers whispered, mocked, even took pictures of her as though she were a spectacle. Finally, the man across the aisle leaned closer again. His voice dripped with arrogance. "You should be grateful they even let you sit here. Honestly, people like you—" He didn't finish his sentence. Jasmine's calm mask finally cracked. Her hand moved before she thought, slap. The sound echoed through the cabin like thunder. Gasps erupted. Every passenger froze. The man's smug grin vanished, replaced with stunned silence. Jasmine's voice was low but sharp. "Don't you ever speak to me that way again." The entire first-class cabin went silent. The flight attendant hurried over, outraged. "How dare you strike a passenger? You'll be reported to the captain." But before she could continue, Jasmine reached into her bag. She pulled out a sleek, embossed folder, something no one expected. She opened it calmly. Revealing documents stamped with the airline's official seal, her voice was cool and steady. Perhaps the captain should know who I really am. The attendant froze. What do you mean? Jasmine's eyes locked with hers. My name is Jasmine Wilson, majority shareholder and CEO of this airline. The entire cabin gasped. The whispers that once mocked her turned into stunned silence, and for the first time on that flight, Jasmine smiled. The cabin was frozen in shock. A moment ago, Jasmine Wilson was just another passenger being mocked, humiliated, and ignored. Now she had revealed the truth. She wasn't just in first class, she was the owner of the airline. Gasps rippled across the rows. Phones that had been sneaking pictures suddenly lowered. Whispered insults vanished. Every eye was locked on Jasmine, who sat poised, calm, and unshaken. The head attendant stammered, her voice trembling. That's impossible. You can't be... Jasmine slid the documents across the tray table with deliberate calm. The bold print was undeniable. Majority shareholder and chief executive officer, Jasmine Wilson. The attendant's face drained of color. She stumbled back a step, suddenly aware of how every passenger was watching. I'll have to inform the captain, she whispered. You do that, Jasmine said coolly. And while you're at it, fetch me the champagne you claimed had run out. The attendant swallowed hard and hurried away. Minutes later, the cockpit door opened and the captain himself stepped into the cabin. His eyes scanned the tense faces before settling on Jasmine. Ms. Wilson? He asked carefully. Jasmine nodded. Yes, I believe your crew has been less than professional. The captain's jaw tightened. He gave a curt nod to the attendants. Step aside. Then he leaned closer to Jasmine. I deeply apologize for any disrespect you've endured. Rest assured this will be addressed. The cabin fell into stunned silence again. The authority in the captain's tone left no room for doubt. This woman was exactly who she claimed to be. The businessman Jasmine had slapped earlier was pale, clutching his cheek. His arrogance evaporated. I didn't know. I thought... Jasmine cut him off with a raised hand. You thought my skin color defined my worth. You thought my seat was a mistake. You thought wrong. The man lowered his head, speechless. Across the aisle, the woman with the designer purse, who had mocked Jasmine earlier, suddenly forced a smile. Ms. Wilson, I didn't mean anything by my comment. Just a misunderstanding. Jasmine's eyes were steady. You meant every word. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. One by one, the passengers who had sneered or whispered found themselves shrinking into their seats. Avoiding her gaze, the captain ordered the attendants to reset service immediately. Within minutes, Jasmine's tray was replaced with the finest meal on board, perfectly plated, with champagne served in crystal. The very same attendant who had humiliated her now bent low, voice shaking. Your champagne, Miss Wilson, please. Forgive me. Jasmine accepted the glass, but her eyes never left the attendants. Service is not about pouring drinks. It's about respect. And today, you failed. The attendant nodded, shame flooding her face. As Jasmine ate, the cabin remained silent. No laughter. No whispers. Only the sound of forks on porcelain and the occasional nervous cough. Finally, Jasmine set her glass down and spoke, not just to the attendants, but to everyone in first class. Her voice was calm, but it carried across the cabin. Do you all know what I find most disappointing? It isn't the insults. It isn't even the poor service. What disappoints me is how quickly you all assumed I didn't belong here. Not one of you questioned the injustice you saw. You either laughed or stayed silent. Heads lowered. Eyes fell to the floor. Jasmine continued. First class isn't just about luxury. It's about standards. And today, every standard was broken. Her words hung heavy in the air. Even passengers in economy who had heard the commotion craned their necks to glimpse what was happening. Whispers spread down the aisle. The owner of the airline is on board. And she's furious. The humiliation that had once been hers was now theirs. One brave young attendant finally stepped forward. She looked barely 20, her voice trembling. Miss Wilson, I'm new. I didn't participate, but I also didn't stop it. I'm sorry. Jasmine studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since boarding, her expression softened. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite fear. Remember that. Don't let silence make you complicit. The young attendant nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the captain contacted ground control. We have the CEO on board and she has witnessed misconduct. Prepare for an incident report. Control responded sharply. Understood. Handle with utmost discretion. Media coverage will be severe if this leaks. The captain glanced back toward the cabin. He knew this flight would be remembered, not for turbulence or weather, but for a storm of a different kind. As the plane cruised above the clouds, Jasmine leaned back in her seat, staring out the window. The city lights far below looked small, distant. She thought about the irony. She had built this airline on a vision of equality, luxury for all, regardless of background. Yet here she was, treated as if she didn't belong in the very cabin she created. Her voice, low but firm, broke the silence. I didn't fight my way to the top to see this airline turn into a breeding ground for arrogance and discrimination. Change will come, and it will start with me. The atmosphere shifts. The rest of the flight unfolded under a heavy hush. The champagne kept flowing, the meals were flawless, and the attendants hovered nervously, desperate to please. But no amount of service could erase what had already been done. Passengers avoided Jasmine's gaze, each silently reckoning with their own guilt. Some began to whisper apologies. Ms. Wilson, I shouldn't have judged. I didn't realize who you were. To which Jasmine responded with the same steady truth. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. As the plane began its descent, the captain returned once more to Jasmine's side. He bent slightly, speaking with respect. Ms. Wilson, we're preparing to land. Ground staff have been alerted. Whatever action you choose, the company will support you. Jasmine nodded. Good, because the lesson doesn't end here. It begins here. Her words were firm, final, and with that, she finished her champagne, closed her folder, and prepared to deliver the most unexpected reckoning these passengers and this airline had ever seen. The wheels touched down with a heavy thud. Passengers shifted in their seats, some anxious, some sweating, all aware that this landing was unlike any other. The whispers had grown louder as the flight drew closer to its end. News had already spread through the cabin. The woman they had mocked, insulted, and dismissed was the very person who controlled the airline's future. When the plane rolled to a stop at the gate, Jasmine remained seated, calm as ever, while the others fidgeted nervously. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Please remain seated. Ground staff will be boarding shortly. The door opened, and a team of senior airline managers stepped into first class. Their eyes immediately found Jasmine. The lead manager bowed his head slightly, his tone formal but full of urgency. Ms. Wilson, we're here at your request. How would you like us to proceed? The entire cabin went still. It was a surreal reversal. The people who had treated her like she didn't belong now sat silent while authority bent toward her. Jasmine stood, her presence commanding. She looked around the cabin, letting her gaze rest on each passenger who had laughed, sneered, or insulted her. No one dared meet her eyes. Proceed, she repeated softly. Yes, let's proceed with truth. Gasps spread as camera flashes erupted near the gate. Reporters had somehow caught wind that something unusual was happening. Microphones were already being raised. A scandal was brewing, and Jasmine knew it. Escorted down the jet bridge, she didn't rush. Every step was deliberate, heels clicking like a drumbeat of justice. Behind her, passengers trailed nervously, realizing that this was no longer just a private incident. It was about to explode into public view. On the terminal floor, reporters swarmed. Ms. Wilson, is it true you were discriminated against by your own staff? What happened in first class? Do you plan to fire the crew? Jasmine paused at the podium hastily set up by the airline staff. Flashbulbs lit the space. For a moment, she stood silently, scanning the crowd, the crew, the guilty passengers. Then she spoke. Yes, what you've heard is true. On this flight, I was treated as though I did not belong in first class. Not because of my ticket, not because of my behavior, but because of the color of my skin. The terminal erupted with gasps, reporters scribbling furiously. Jasmine's tone hardened. Let me be clear. I wasn't discriminated against as a CEO. I was discriminated against as a human being. And that makes this bigger than me, bigger than one flight. This is about the values of this airline and about the values of every person who chooses silence when they see injustice. Passengers who had once mocked her shrank behind sunglasses and lowered heads, terrified of being recognized. The crew stood frozen, pale with dread. Jasmine continued, her words slicing through the chaos. Today, I witnessed laughter at prejudice. I witnessed silence in the face of cruelty. I witnessed my own staff forget what service truly means. And I tell you this, it will not be ignored. The crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. Jasmine straightened, her voice resonant. I built this airline on the idea that luxury and dignity should belong to everyone. Today I was reminded why that mission matters. Because prejudice is alive. Because arrogance blinds. Because silence allows injustice to thrive. Her eyes swept across the cameras. So here is what will happen. The staff who participated in discrimination will face consequences. Not out of revenge, but as a reminder, respect is not optional. The passengers who mocked instead of questioned, I hope you remember today, because you will never forget the day you tried to strip dignity from someone who built the very seat you sat in. The terminal was silent, except for the clicking of cameras. Jasmine's presence radiated authority, but also something deeper, a righteous fire. Then her voice softened, not with weakness, but with resolve. But this is not just punishment. This is transformation. From today forward, every crew member will undergo training, not just in service, but in humanity. Every passenger who boards our planes will be reminded. Kindness is not an upgrade. It is the standard. A wave of murmurs filled the hall. Even those who weren't part of the flight felt the weight of her words. She leaned slightly toward the microphones. You don't need to know someone's title to treat them with dignity. You don't need to know someone's wealth to show them respect. If you only respect people when you believe they hold power, you respect no one at all. The hall erupted in applause. Some clapped out of genuine admiration. Others clapped out of guilt. But all of them knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Behind Jasmine, the once arrogant businessman she had slapped earlier approached hesitantly. His voice cracked. Ms. Wilson, I'm sorry. Jasmine turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then finally she replied, I don't need your apology. I need your change. The man nodded, ashamed, his arrogance shattered. Cameras flashed again. Questions poured in, but Jasmine raised her hand, silencing the noise. Her closing words rang like a verdict. Remember this day, not because a CEO revealed herself on a plane, but because a woman, judged unworthy of a seat she owned, chose to rise anyway. And remember this, true class has nothing to do with a seat number. True class is how you treat people when you think no one is watching. She stepped away from the podium, leaving the reporters in stunned silence. The crowd parted as she walked, a trail of respect following in her wake. The story would dominate headlines, ignite debates, and force an entire industry to confront uncomfortable truths. But for Jasmine, it was never about headlines. It was about justice. As she left the terminal, her final thought echoed like a promise. The skies will never look the same again. The days after the incident were a storm. News channels replayed the clip of Jasmine at the podium on an endless loop. Headlines screamed, "Airline CEO discriminated against on her own flight." Talk shows debated it. Social media exploded with hashtags, and millions of people shared their own experiences of prejudice while traveling. For Jasmine, this wasn't just a story. It was an opportunity. She called an emergency board meeting the very next morning. The board members, still reeling from the global backlash, sat stiffly around the table as she entered. You all saw what happened, Jasmine began, her voice steady. Our brand was humiliated. But make no mistake, this isn't just a PR crisis. This is a moral crisis. One executive shifted nervously. Miss Wilson, the media is demanding resignations. The unions are furious. Passengers are calling for boycotts. What do you propose we do? Jasmine leaned forward, her presence undeniable. We will not sweep this under the rug. We will not offer a shallow apology and move on. We will change this airline from the inside out. The room fell silent. She outlined her plan with precision. Every single staff member, from pilots to ground crew, would undergo new training, not only in customer service, but in cultural sensitivity, empathy, and dignity. Anonymous passenger reports would be taken seriously, and discrimination of any kind would result in immediate review and potential dismissal. An older board member cleared his throat. But Ms. Wilson, the cost of implementing such programs will be less than the cost of losing our soul, Jasmine cut in sharply. Her words silenced him. Within a week, the airline announced sweeping reforms. Press conferences were held, training centers were established, and Jasmine herself appeared in ads promising a new era of dignity in the skies. The world watched, skeptical at first, but the sincerity in her eyes won hearts. Meanwhile, the passengers from that infamous flight found themselves at the center of unwanted attention. The businessman who had mocked her lost clients as videos of his sneers went viral. The woman with the designer purse closed her social media accounts after being flooded with criticism. They had tried to humiliate someone they thought powerless, only to become symbols of arrogance and shame. But Jasmine never named them publicly. She didn't need to. The lesson was already written across their faces. Weeks later, Jasmine returned to the skies, not as a CEO making a statement, but simply as a passenger. This time, the welcome was different. Flight attendants greeted her warmly, but more importantly, they greeted every passenger warmly. An elderly couple in economy received the same kindness as a businessman in first class. A young mother with a crying baby was helped instead of glared at. The change was real, and Jasmine could feel it. As the plane lifted above the clouds, she sipped her champagne quietly, watching attendants move through the cabin with genuine care. She smiled, not because she was being treated well, but because everyone was. Midway through the flight, a passenger approached her nervously. He was a college student, wide-eyed with curiosity. "Excuse me, Miss Wilson, I wanted to say thank you. My mom's a flight attendant. She told me what you've done. She said the atmosphere at work has completely changed. People actually respect each other now." Jasmine's smile widened. "Tell your mother this. Dignity is contagious. It spreads when people are brave enough to demand it." The student nodded, grateful, before returning to his seat. Jasmine looked back out the window, the clouds glowing gold in the sunlight. For the first time in years, she felt the skies were finally becoming what she had always dreamed they could be. A place where everyone, regardless of who they were, felt they belonged. Months later, Jasmine was invited to speak at an international aviation summit. Leaders, CEOs, and government officials filled the hall. She stepped onto the stage, her presence as commanding as it had been in that terminal weeks earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice resonant, "when people board a plane, they are not just buying a ticket. They are placing their trust in us. Trust that we will carry them safely. Trust that we will treat them with dignity. Trust that the skies belong to all of us." The hall was silent, every word sinking deep. I learned something on a flight I will never forget. I learned that prejudice does not vanish with wealth or with titles. I learned that silence in the face of cruelty is just as harmful as cruelty itself. And I learned that true leadership isn't about sitting in the front row, it's about standing up when others are too afraid to. She paused, her eyes scanning the hall. Airlines do not only connect cities, they connect people. And if we cannot respect those people equally, then we do not deserve their trust. The future of aviation is not just faster planes or bigger cabins. The future is dignity in the skies. The hall erupted into applause. Some stood, some wiped away tears, others nodded with the weight of understanding. Jasmine Wilson had not just transformed her airline. She had set a new standard for an entire industry. When the summit ended, reporters once again crowded around her. "Ms. Wilson, do you think your reforms will spread to other airlines?" Jasmine answered simply, "They already are. Because dignity is not a luxury. It's a right. And with that, she walked away, heels clicking on the marble floor, leaving behind a legacy that would outlive her. The story of Jasmine Wilson, the woman who had been humiliated in first class only to reveal she owned the very skies above, became more than just a viral moment. It became a parable, a reminder told in boardrooms, classrooms, and family dinners: never assume someone's worth based on appearances. Never withhold respect because you think someone has none to give back. For in the end, true class is not defined by the seat you sit in. True class is defined by how you treat others when you think no one is watching. And somewhere above the clouds, in a quiet first-class seat, Jasmine Wilson looked out at the endless horizon and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning."